A Leo sun, Virgo ascendant, turns to a Virgo sun, Virgo ascendant. It says, you could be a little critical at times. Back at you. Back at you. I started this video off with a certain idea, and then the idea essentially went into something else, so I'm probably going to have to change the name of this video. But what is the world you want? Let's start there. What is the world you want? What is the world you want? And I don't ask that question with this notion that you could turn around and just kind of snap your fingers and the world just changes into something else. And I don't even ask this in somewhat of a naive way. I'm just asking this in the sense that any real political disposition would imagine had to start there. What is the world that you ultimately want? I even know that asking that question deals with people's culture, how they were raised, how they were just kind of thrust into reality of sorts, the body that they have, the biases, the incentives that they've been working with, where they were born, when they were, and all that stuff is part of it. But sitting above it all and just kind of evaluating of sorts, what's the world that you want? I think lefties, to some degree, are plagued with a certain curse. This thing of the world is fucked up because based on a certain bias, it makes zero sense. Like, I don't necessarily think you're entirely like me, but I do think people who find themselves on this distribution of the political scale have certain things that they find in common. I look at the world, and while I can't necessarily see it all in regards to what I want, I do almost know, almost as a religious tenet, and let's be clear, all of these things are to some degree religious tenets. They're just kind of biases and myths that you find yourself buying into for various reasons that you buy into them. Sometimes those things are not even your choice. You don't even know that you're buying into them. All those things just so happen to be true. But from the standpoint, I look at the world and say, human beings are far more important than any notion of profit. Infinitely so. And as such, human beings have a certain curse of experience. This matter, for whatever reason, looks at the world and processes the world. It feels pain. It experiences joy. Nothing else does that. It's infinitely more important than profit. That's how I pursue the world. Those human beings that experience the world should have health care when they're sick because experience allows them to experience a certain hell, and I don't necessarily want to experience that hell, meaning being trapped into a body that is broken and feeling pain. I want that being to be able to have health care. I want that being to be able to get education without having tons of debt. Something that is, again, is not real, a construct of sorts, but at the very least in our head, it processes a particular way without debt on their backs. I want that person, when they get older, to not experience perpetual lack and vulnerability. And last but not least, a question between profit for a small 1% as opposed to destruction of the planet itself. I don't want that to be a question. And I want to enshrine in almost a hegemonic belief in the heads of each and every human being that whatever takes place, that part's true. That is not the way the world functions. Despite the fact that you would think that human beings, who the overwhelming majority take the shit edge of that not being true, would push to make that true. That's not the way the world works. And because that's not the way the world works, we devolve into this notion of politics to try to convince and push the agenda into something that is more aligned with that particular alignment. We failed to get a coalition. Despite this notion that, hey, maybe if you work, or everybody should be able to at the very least get a job, and technology should be used to the benefit of human beings, not necessarily purely and entirely to the wealth or the benefit of a top 1%. Even making those arguments, it seems absolutely right. This notion that we, human beings, workers, go out and create our particular society, and yet, 95% of the wealth of that go to the top 1%. That seems maddening to me, and maddening to people of this particular political disposition. And we try to make the argument and yet fail to get a political coalition to make that argument stick. What I would point to you is that 91% of the better financed candidate wins. This is the Washington Post. I would point to you that this and this are not unrelated. The fact that oligarchs can essentially dump tons and tons of money into our political campaign. Obama raised over $1 billion in that race. Romney raised somewhere near the same amount. The person who runs in the next race will probably do the same, especially whether it's a Democrat or a Republican. This is not unrelated to this. They're buying your candidates. Oligarchs are buying your candidates. They were doing it under Obama when Citigroup made the decisions on who was going to be in his particular thing, and Obama didn't do anything about Wall Street, or nothing significant about Wall Street. Nobody went to jail. And they did it under Bush, and they will do it again, or they were going to do it again, or try to, under Hillary Clinton. She also raised over $1 billion. This is not unrelated to this. They're buying your candidates. His race doesn't matter. Why am I saying this? Why am I bringing this up? Bernie Sanders, in his last comeback speech, the entirety of that speech, he spent about 40 minutes. Most of that speech was essentially stuff that Sanders has said before, meaning he gets on a campaign trail and he just recites policy. But the end of that speech, to me, was one of the most profound, poignant, and speaks of a collective politics that we've never seen before. Like, it's something that we have not, in our lifetime, seen in regards to a political figure speaking of almost a spiritual politics, as opposed to the other guy in the race who is begging for money. I want to talk about a tale of two campaigns. Biden trying to get as many millionaires and billionaires to put money in his pocket as possible, whereas 33% of the people have already maxed out for Joe Biden, as opposed to like 3% for Sanders. That type of politician who will, like his predecessor, who raised over $1 billion and ended up with this result, versus somebody who's, for the first time in our lifetime, taking money, literally grassroots, through and through. A tale of two campaigns. And for the first time, a campaign that can put through a winning coalition to make that particular ideology, maybe not necessarily get there specifically, but at the very least, tilt the point of view of a country into that direction. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, subscribe. You can always support PayPal, Patreon. Campaigns, for the most part, and the way our campaign system is structured, has allowed massive amounts of cash to flood into our political races. 90% of those races are won by the side with the most cash. As a rational human being that is in a campaign that is trying to win a race, meaning a contest, when you know that 91% of the races are won by the side with the most cash, where do you lean? Where do you lean? Think about it for the moment. Where do you lean? And if you've been leaning that way for 20, 30 years, at which point are you just over there? My point is this. Any rational campaign that knows that will use that cash to win those races. And ideology at that point start to matter less. Meaning this notion of what we want to do start to matter less than just raising enough money that's possible to win the race. Your perspective tilts. Your campaign tilts. Your point of view tilts. And if you don't believe me, look back at what Democrats were versus what Democrats are now. If you want anything changed, to get to a point of view similar to the one that I mentioned in the beginning, how do you get there when that particular point of view is directly against this notion of these guys having billions and billions of dollars? Meaning your point of view directly cuts into their ability to make profit. And in a subjective sense, their point of view is not wrong as an absolute. There is no point of view that's right as an absolute. Even that particular ideology I accept is to some degree religious belief. However, based on my point of view, it is difficult to have both. And as it's difficult to have both, I espouse this particular one, which goes directly against theirs. Meaning my points of view cuts into their ability to get profit. And since, as such, if poverty is a thing of policy, if that's true, then that money gets dumped into the campaign to ensure that that policy allows them to keep their billions, keep their millions of dollars, to keep the environment fucked up, to keep social services cut, and to essentially fuck up the environment. The guy who's representing them in the campaign is Joe Biden.
A little over 3 months away from the Iowa caucuses, and your campaign is burning through a lot of cash. 4 of your rivals have more than you, and Bernie Sanders has more than 3 times the amount you have in his bank account. Are you confident that you're going to have the resources if this primary carries all the way till June?
I am confident.
And are you changing anything operationally?
No, remember, we got started later than anybody at all in this campaign, number one. Number two, we did not start off by dropping $10 million from a Senate campaign, wherever that money was raised from.
Don't be bitter. Don't be bitter. Don't be bitter. He's talking about Warren, and it's $11 million. Elizabeth Warren, even though she kept saying, I'm grassroots, took $11 million that was not grassroots raised and dumped it into her presidential campaign. That's what he's talking about right here. He's essentially saying, look, we started late. Elizabeth Warren took a bunch of money and dumped it into her campaign, and now she's talking about all this money she's raising. So, understand that we're bleeding cash. The issue here is that Joe Biden only had like $9 million cash on hand, and his allies have been freaked out by this because their thought is, oh my God, Joe Biden can't raise money. And not just can't raise money, the money that he is raising, especially from the oligarchs, are being tapped out. Joe Biden has tapped out of 33% of the money from the people who've been donating the money, meaning they've hit their max. Sanders, again, that's only true for 3% of its people, meaning as he goes from primary to primary to primary to primary, he will go through that primary and through that presidential race, barely tapping out what he's getting from his constituents. Because keep in mind, his constituents are poor. They're poor. They're salespeople. They're clerks. They're people who work at Walmart and Amazon. People who are getting the shit end of the stick in regards to the economic spectrum. So they can only give him so much anyway. So this notion of them sending him massive amounts of cash, not so much. Biden has been relying on high dollar donors. But what does that mean for you if Joe Biden is relying on high dollar donors? Who, again, does he lean to? Does this happen in the Sanders administration? And is it any wonder that those billionaires are not going to give Sanders a ton of cash in order to change this to something else? To change the skew. My point to you is that this skew is directly related to the skew. They're not opposites. And if ordinary guy Joe Biden is going to the oligarchs to give him cash, and his allies are begging for super PACs to help him, what does that mean for you? And what does that mean for me? As opposed to the guy who's been grassroots through and through. Who do they lean to? Just by definition of who is giving to them. The people who are given to them are given to them because it's directly in their interest to do so. I'm making the point that there's a difference dramatically between this person and this person. I want to show you something else. Back in June, Joe Biden goes to one of his millionaire, billionaire, oligarch friends when he's kind of trying to smooth these people to give him money. And he says the following: no one's standard of living will change. Nothing will fundamentally change. Because we have income inequality as large as we have in the United States today. It brews and ferments political discord and basic revolution. Not a joke, not a joke. It allows demagogues to say that the reason we have this is because I have a reputation of always say what I mean. The problem is sometimes say all that I mean. I don't know what that last part meant, but you got his point. He's in a swank thing with oligarchs and is effectively saying, look, nothing will change. Nothing at all will change. No one's standard of living will change. I will not be the guy. I will not be a demagogue. I will not point out that you guys are a problem. Not at all. I am Joe Biden. I'm your guy. Listen to what Sanders says. You've heard Sanders' speeches before, so I'm not going to necessarily go through the entirety of the speeches, just the last 20, 30 seconds. Because I want you to see a dramatic difference in regards to who one person represents versus the other.
Now, you know, when I talk about the proposals that I think we should adopt to protect the working families of this country, I'm often criticized, and people say, Bernie, it's so expensive. How are you going to pay for these proposals? Well, let me tell you exactly how we're going to pay for these proposals. We're going to tell the wealthiest people in this country that they are going to start paying their fair share of taxes. We're going to rescind Trump's tax breaks for the billionaires and large corporations. We're going to end the insanity of providing hundreds of billions in tax breaks and subsidies to the fossil fuel industry. And in my view, we do not have to spend more than the next 10 nations combined on defense spending. Standing before you today, I believe more than I have ever believed that we are at a moment in our great country's history where all of us coming together can create the America that we are entitled to have, the America that we know that we can become. We can create a new America, true to the principles that are supposed to be the foundation of our democracy. And I want to ask all of you to do me a favor and to take a look around you. Just take a look around you right here at this assembly of people. And if you look around you, what you will find that we have people here of every race, every gender identity. We have different religions. We have different ethnicities. We have men and women here. We have people who are young, and we have people who are old. We are a reflection of the diversity and the strength of the movement that we have built. And it is that movement, black and white and Latino, Asian American, Native American, all of us coming together. It is that movement that is going to transform this country. Now let me just tell you what you already know. And that our opponents, whether it is the Republican establishment, Democratic establishment, whether it is Wall Street, the insurance companies, drug companies, fossil fuel industry, military industrial complex, prison industrial complex, the whole damn 1%. They're not going to give up their wealth and their power without a fight. And the question that we have got to answer together is, are we prepared to stand up to them and transform this country? I want you all to take a look around and find someone you don't know. Maybe somebody doesn't look kind of like you. Maybe somebody might be of a different religion than you. Maybe they come from a different country. My question now to you is, are you willing to fight for that person who you don't even know as much as you're willing to fight for yourself?
That's different. That's different. I mean, I go back to the first question that I started off with. What is the world that you want? What is the world that you want? His argument. And by the way, he has a funding mechanism, meaning he has the capacity to do it. He's blowing out stadiums, meaning he definitely has the base and the support base for it. And he's asking this very basic question of what is the world that you want? And are you willing, in this kind of collective self-interest way, to work for that particular world? You're not going to get everything you want, but taking it to the left, getting it to a point where the public looks at itself with a certain degree of pride and a certain degree of worth that says, yeah, this is the world that we want. We can do these things. Profit is not more important than human beings. One person is not breaking up people along the lines of race or sex. It's looking at this as a collective front. Black, white, gay, straight, transgender, across the board. Just one. Same interests, same myths. The other guy is begging for cash and telling millionaires and billionaires that nothing changes. One person is not going to get you the world that you want. And this is even from the standpoint of somebody who's not necessarily far to the left. Even just from the standpoint of, we need to stop these wars. Technology should be used for the best interests of human beings. Yeah, people should have health care, etc., etc., etc. Why do you want somebody who's bought and paid for? And it kills me that this campaign is being propped up by African Americans, essentially old blacks, who thinks that this is the only guy who could beat Trump. But he's not the guy. And you have a unique opportunity for something else. No, it's not going to be everything you want. Yes, it moves us over. Extreme Chucka. New York Times changed Hillary's claim from Russia to Republicans. I saw that. All right, I'm going to end this. Like, share, subscribe. Thanks all.